Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Mr Mgojo, and I appreciate your input here today. You've put together certain things, you've added pieces that I've found last week and a few weeks ago when I questioned Mr Mgojo, because it's very clear the strategy that was used, and you can connect the dots, as Mr Gordon would say, very clearly. How things changed when Mr Molefe arrived. Things changed dramatically. We saw Optimum Glencore were busy renegotiating a hardship contract, and we're making progress with that, with supplies to Hendrina. Suddenly that was put to an end. We saw you were busy negotiating closure, but possibly an extension of the on-it contracts. Again, suddenly it was put to an end when Mr Molefe came on the scene. To me, I couldn't understand how the Guptas could have bought the Optimum mine at a loss of 100 million to provide Hendrina at 150 Rand a ton, how they were going to turn that around. And the obvious answer was a self-induced crisis had to happen at on-it so that the Optimum mine coal went to on-it. But to do that, you had to reduce Hendrina. The electricity had to be reduced. So it was complicit. Eskom board members, Eskom CEOs, everywhere were complicit in this. And that's why I support my colleague's suggestion of recalling witnesses that came and told us a different version. And you would have noticed Mr Mgojo last week was very evasive when I asked him about the Mufube contract. And he in fact appealed to the chairman and said, "Chairman, I'm not prepared on that," because he was not speaking the truth. Mufube was supplying coal, as you pointed out, at 132 Rand per ton. Nobody could beat that. And that was cancelled. And that is why I'm outraged and angry about this. Because not only did it impact all those workers that you had to go and explain to, not only was the mine closed, on-it mine, but it affects every consumer in this nation that has to pay more for electricity because of this cost escalation, as you've set out in your submission, that could have been avoided quite easily had your contracts been extended and had the original Optimum CSA been extended. Would you agree with that?
Honorable Swart, the evidence is very clear. It is before us. A lot has been said as part of the submissions here. I think there were a lot of dots that were there, but I think what is beginning to happen now is that some of the last dots are coming out, and you are able to now put the line between the dots, as the Honorable Gordon would say. To your point, it becomes very clear even for us when I read the letter that was just given to me, which I'm seeing it for the first time, that another piece of the puzzle starts to emerge for me to get a better understanding as to what was happening behind the scenes when things were so quiet in my space in terms of my own negotiations. That dot now becomes clear, and then suddenly, for me, the picture becomes whole. The picture is not a pretty picture. The picture has had a serious impact on people's lives. The picture has had a serious impact in the people of this country. As I had indicated before, that the costs associated with the power, and what it becomes almost for me, if I have to talk in my own personal capacity, what becomes almost very ludicrous in this whole thing is when in one breath You can go to NERSA and ask for a 19% increase for the price of electricity, and yet you are seeing people orchestrating things in ways that undermines the essence and the fabric of what should be good ethical conduct and its consequential impact into the economy and the people. And so, to your point, I share an anger which goes beyond just being a CEO of EXXARO. It talks about ethical conduct by leaders, because as leaders, we should be an example.
You're quite correct, and that is what the court, when it highlighted the pension payout of Mr. Molefe, was scathing about the leadership that took those decisions, and it indicates a total lack of fiduciary duties, as you pointed out earlier. And that is why I said those directors should be declared delinquent directors, but should also have been investigated for criminal contraventions of PFMA, of the Companies Act, of various other issues, and these are issues which we will be considering. But I hope that similarly, that you've offered the evidence today that when the Commission of Inquiry is tendered into state capture, that you would volunteer similar evidence, because this is at the heart of state capture in our nation. We know our budget is going to be presented in next week, and the impact of the guarantees for Eskom places our whole nation at risk. So you've got workers that lost their jobs. You've got consumers. Every consumer that puts on a light is affected by these reckless decisions. And you've got our whole national treasury is at risk for reckless decisions to benefit one family, a Gupta family. Thankfully, one of them is arrested today. Thankfully. But we're looking forward to many more arrests, and we're looking forward to that money coming back. And I'm very concerned about that Matla mine that was a flagship of South Africa, sitting now with one of the most black empowered companies, EXXARO, that now is almost having to close. And I would urge, Chair, that when we engage further with Eskom and the new board, that these issues, they are re-looking at all these contracts. They're re-looking at them all. But that these issues that you are raising with us now, because this is more information that we are gaining. I wanted to ask you just about Komati. Did you provide any power to, did you sell coal to Komati, and that was also ended?
We supplied, Honorable Swart, coal from our mine called NBC. That one, fortunately, is one that had been continuing up to now.
But I understand that Koenfontein, which is the Optimum Group, which is a Gupta-related company, has last year got a lengthy extension of a new contract for another 8 years, and that Komati is about to be closed down. What happens when the power station is closed down? You are paid out for the balance of the contract, or is there a negotiation? Because my understanding is Mr. Koko last year extended that contract for 8 years, and 2 months later the board has decided to close that power station down. Is that your understanding as well, or reduce the electricity output, Komati?
Honorable Swart, I'm not very cited on the details of these contracts, so I think I would
reserve
I'm walking on dangerous grounds.
That's fine. No problem. That's fine.
If you may, let me just confer. I think my colleagues here seem to have better insight of this. The assumption, Honorable Swart, is that if you are dealing with a captive mine, then Eskom would have to be liable in terms of the costs associated with whatever responsibilities that they may have within the contract. Now, what is not clear for me is, and this is the same situation, I guess one could actually say, does EXXARO even have a claim on any revenue loss out of Anod, given the fact that the capital that has not been made available and the volumes decline has actually impacted EXXARO negatively in terms of its ability to have earned that extra income. So to the extent that one can still have a claim to put on Eskom that contractually you were supposed to give me capital for X tons and you did not give me the capital, you've deprived me the opportunity of the balance between what I'm currently producing and what I was supposed to produce. So in that instance, but I am not sure what happens when the power station itself closes, what obligations and rights are there.
The point I just wanted to make was, and we visited Eskom, and I was asking about the mines that have been reduced. The whole issue started with Hendrina, and that mine is now being, that power station is now being reduced. Last year, Komati, a contract was given to a Gupta-related company for another 8 years, and 2 months later, the board decides to reduce the power station. That to me is outrageous. And that the National Treasury is investigating as well, that contract that is extended. So the point is, at the end of the day, the public protector said that Eskom leant over backwards, its board leant over backwards to accommodate Tegeta. And I'm sure you'll agree with me in that regard, hearing the evidence that is now in the public domain.
Honorable Swart, what is very clear that we didn't get that same privilege.
And the letter that you sent, which again I found outrageous, to the department, to the minister, pleading for help, pleading that 1,500 workers would not be fired, is ignored. But at the same time, a letter is sent to benefit Tegeta and to request a prepayment to buy a mine, not even for capital expenditures, but to buy a mine. And then we see the whole scenario. At the time you wrote your letter in December, the minister, where is he sitting? In Switzerland, negotiating the sale of a mine, instead of looking to your interests and the interests of Eskom in the long term. You see a penalty of 2 billion rand is imposed. Have you ever been granted a guarantee where you asked for a capital, a genuine capital investment? You should have asked for a guarantee. It seems they are easier to obtain, because I've never as a lawyer seen a state-owned company giving a guarantee to another company and then deceiving its board, who said they never knew it was to buy a company. But where have you ever heard this nonsense? And that is why when you see this evidence, the one after the next, the different departments cooperating, minerals suddenly having Section 54 stoppages at Glencore mines, the pressure building up on them, business rescue, the pressure you under. And I'm sure if we hear other mines, it will be the same thing, to benefit one specific company, Tegeta, Oak Bay, at the expense of yourselves as a company, your shareholders, your workers, and the consumers in South Africa. I think it is absolutely outrageous. And that's why I welcome the input from you, because we are putting the dots together. And your questions here are rhetorical, because you know the answer already. On your page 35, why, when Mr Molefe assumed the position of CEO, did EXXARO's relationship with Eskom deteriorate so markedly? Because it had to. You had to lose those contracts at Arno so that the mine, the coal from Optimum, could get sold there at 400 450 to 500 rand a ton, as opposed to the 150 rand per ton that Hendrina was getting. It's very obvious. The scenario is, for those viewers, it's very clear. You've got Optimum supplying coal to Hendrina at 150 rand per ton at a loss. That's not going to work for the Guptas, so they've got to make sure that they can sell that coal to Arnott and others at 450 rand. To do that, you've got to reduce Hendrina, but you've got to cancel EXXARO's contracts and the one at 132 rand a ton. And that, to me, is absolutely outrageous. But you've got to have complicit people. Mr Molefe comes onto the scene. He won't answer your calls. He won't meet with you as the CEO of a black-empowered company, but he takes 58 calls to the Guptas at Saxon World. Thankfully, today there was a raid there. But he won't meet with you of long-standing coal mining experience and negotiate and talk to you. He won't even talk to you. I think this is outrageous. And you can see, as we link all the dots together, how state capture took place. But it is unraveling. And these members with me here have stood firm. Their lives have been threatened. Our witnesses have been threatened. But we have stood firm to get to the bottom of this rot. So you also ask, why was Mafube terminated despite the mine delivering the cheapest supplies of coals? Because it had to suit the Guptas. It had to suit Tegeta. It had to suit the contracts that were required. And where you asked for a 1.8 billion rand capital injection, it was refused. Minister Brown refuses it because she says your company that has got one of the best BEE qualifications won't. There are questions around socio-economic development. Again, there's no reason for that refusal. But others are given guarantees and 659 million to purchase a mine. Not a capital injection, but to purchase a mine. So we see, as we put all the dots together, it is so obvious. And that's why we appreciate you coming and explaining to us how Arnott fitted into it, how Medupi fits into it, how Komati fits into it, and the fact of the costs that have been added unnecessarily with the transport now of coal by truck that is unnecessary when you've got conveyor belts. So from my side, I want to thank you, but I just want to clarify one issue, and that is the cost of the coal to Arnott. Now, according to the PricewaterhouseCoopers report, Eskom says they are paying 1,132 per ton. But according to the Denton's report, it was only 686 per ton. So you understand, so even they were, if I understand it correctly, they were telling their own board members incorrect information to justify the cancellation of your contract. So instead of it's almost double the deceit, where they said you were being paid more than 1,000 rand per ton when it was actually only 686 rand per ton. And had that continued, you would have kept that mine, would have been operating, all those people, those workers would have been employed. And I think that, if you would just confirm that, thank you, Chair, for my input from my side.
Thank you very much, Honorable Swart. We have always known that that figure that was being stated was not the right figure. And hence why we even came up with a graph that I think it's one of the annexures here, which shows that historical costs relative to the volumes. So even if you said, and you do say, which is Annexure A, page 50. If you just had to now take that price that you've said of third-party coal, it's not even talking to it being delivered. If you actually were to now add the cost of transport, R1.50 per kilometer per ton, you will find that the delivered cost of that third-party coal, despite the fact that we have reduced our volumes to such an extent, which really increased the cost, that coal would have been delivered no cheaper than what anode was actually costing the mine to produce at that particular time. So to your point that mine could have continued going at that cost while we were now implementing the plan to bring it below 500 and to 450 delivered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swart.